Welcome to PodRocket, everyone. I'm Kate. With me today is Matt Perry. Hi, Matt. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great, thanks. Yeah, how are you?
Thanks for joining us. Doing well. And our engineer, Noel. Hi, Noel. Welcome back.
Hey, Kate.
How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm getting over a cold. You can probably hear it. I feel like, half the globe right now, but I'm hanging in there.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Matt, if you wouldn't mind starting us off and kind of telling us what you're working on and Framer Motion, Motion One, all that good stuff.
Yeah, clearly have some sort of addiction to writing animation libraries. I'm writing Framer Motion, which is a React animation library, and Motion One, which is more of like a jQuery for Web Animations API, which is the native JavaScript animations API that comes bundled in like every browser pretty much these days. But it just smooths over some of the inconsistencies while adding like a few features of its own.
Very cool. Awesome. So I guess just to start, maybe tell us about Popmotion and kind of like that timeline and how it got to now, which is Framer One.
Yeah, so Popmotion was that was my first animation library, and that's very much, I mean, it's still used today, that's still inside of Framer Motion, but it's like a pure JavaScript. The way I see it is it just like pumps out numbers and colors and strings once every animation frame, and you can kind of put those wherever you like. So it doesn't need to be the DOM; it could be 3JS or Pixie, I think. But basically, you can do whatever you want with it. And at some point, I think it was quite flexible, but its job was to be flexible, so I could build stuff on it and stuff like that. But it didn't really get much adoption, I guess, because it is very low level. And the developer experience compared to something like GreenSock wasn't as good because, GreenSock, especially for the DOM, it does its job really well. Whereas Popmotion, you'd have to come along and set the style tag yourself and things like that. So then I was at work once and someone was looking through some code that I'd written and they asked what a tween was. And like, for those who don't know, like a tween is like a very, like going back to the Flash days where you'd put your keyframes A and B, and the tween would be like the animation between those two keyframes, and it would work out like all the spaces in between. And it just struck me like as something. It's one of those times when you realise that you don't even know what you know. Like, you're so deep into this. Like, I didn't even think that like a tween's like the fundamental building block of animations, and it never really occurred to me that even as a word, especially to a non-native English speaker, so in so many respects, it's actually quite an unfriendly word. And it got me thinking about all of the other ways in which there's a lot of people out there. I kind of assumed, another bias I had was I kind of assumed that everyone cared about animations the same way I did. So I go the extra mile to write pretty complex animations. And especially when you mix some of that imperative code with React, it could get quite brittle and messy. So I came up with Pose. And the idea with Pose was that all the animations would be declarative the same way React and Vue are, because you could have like special wrappers for React and Vue. And but most importantly, you could just define kind of the values you wanted to be the latest values, and it would by default figure out a nice animation for that. So if it was a transform, which is like a physical, like a rotate, a scale, XY, it would probably use like a spring animation, which is something that has that physical. It can have it's quite a physical motion. So instead of just saying be 1 second or be half a second of animation with a season curve, it has a genuine energy that you can then, if that animation is interrupted, you can pass into the next animation. So it just by default created these really natural motions. And then, Framer came along, asked me to do something similar with Framer Motion, so we could bring those animation capabilities to Framer. And Framer Motion pretty much is Pose. Like it was almost like the next major version of it, but it was React only. Um, and yeah, and so that's how I got as far as I am in a sense today. Whereas Motion One now is like a side project. It's just more. It came out of some experience that I was doing with WAPI, the Web Animations API. I was trying to just make it more user friendly, trying to smooth its rough edges, and yeah, and yesterday I published Motion One for Vue.
Oh wow! Yesterday.
Yeah, just yesterday. Which it's very much like Framer Motion style declarative API, but for Vue and using these WAPI animations under the hood instead of Popmotion.
Yeah, I feel like the closest I ever brushed with Popmotion was when I was doing some side project stuff in Pixie, and people were pointing me at it. How does if you were a web dev going in and you wanted to do your animations kind of at that lower level, would you still point someone at Popmotion now to start a project with it?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's been in a almost finished state, I guess, for a little while. So there's probably not much more I'm going to do with it, apart from keep it, make sure it's current. But bits of it have made its way into Motion One. For instance, we've got like a polyfill for transforms, because to do independent animations on transforms in Safari, where WAPI doesn't yet support CSS variables, we need like a tiny number polyfill, and it's about a kilobyte. And yeah, so bits of Popmotion have ended up there, and I think that polyfill will probably form the basis of a new, not Popmotion, but something like of a similar low level nature. But I'm just trying to keep the focus of Motion One to be DOM, WAPI, whereas that gives Popmotion the freedom to still be this low level thing. It's good to hear that you actually used it for Pixie. I've never used Pixie myself, but that's exactly the kind of, like, I wanted people to use it on like a, something as crazy as an Arduino. Like, you could animate LEDs with this. I never really saw much of that, but you'd get the occasional user, and it was pretty cool when you saw stuff like that.
Yeah, it was a cool world to kind of delve into. Like, again, I was just messing around trying to make some super animated click drag UI stuff. But yeah, it was really nice. I guess if we can kind of wind back time a little bit, how did you kind of get into this space initially? Like, how did you become interested in animation and get started with Popmotion?
Well, right from the start, it was more that when I was like starting out in the career, I was coming more from like a design background. So I really loved Flash, because it sort of took you beyond the limitation, especially at the time. Like, there's so much that you couldn't do with CSS. Like, border radius was new when I was a kid, basically. Transitions were not well supported. So then when you got Flash and you could use green sock in it, some of the effects like background blur and all of these amazing transitions, and to have the GUI as well. So I guess over time I was just more and more interested in making those natural feeling or engaging user interfaces. But then at some point I thought, okay, well, I'll write a book. I started to have all these ideas about how, like, the fidelity of our devices and our inputs. So our outputs being the screen and our inputs being like touch, and the fact that, like, over time, like the graphics on the phone screen, like, it's something as simple as it coming closer to the surface. Like, over time, like, if you look at like an old iPhone or any old portable device like a Nintendo DS or something, it's visually like beneath the sort of top layer of glass or plastic. So you can see, like, it's almost like there's a divorce between you and the interface, and the frame rate's not that good. Whereas now the frame rate's like 120 FPS. So in these, and I'm sure the response time's going down as well. So as that user interface is almost represented in the real world better, and you're represented in the virtual world better by virtue of it accepting your touch input with lower latencies, you can imagine like the Oculus handsets are like ridiculously precise. My thinking was that over time, if you're a software developer, you need to write interfaces that sort of keep up with this change over time. So that includes spring physics and accurate tracking and all of this. So I wanted to write a book that just expressed like certain ways that you could probably make your windows or your modals or your side menus feel a bit more like they belong in the real world. Just really so that the web, because app developers are like, I feel like they've been on the edge pushing this forward, whereas I feel like on the web the bar it tends to be lower, and I think just because of so many reasons, but like budgetary and just the way it is. Like you've got to think about a much wider variety of devices as well. So there's so many reasons. But anyway, I thought if I write a book, then maybe that will. But as I was writing the live examples, there were certain edge cases and uses that I needed to write functions for, like a Spring is a good example. And at some point I looked at it and I thought, I've got a library. And then I never wrote the book and I wrote Popmotion instead. And actually a similar thing happened with Motion 1. I tried to write a book about WAPI, and every time I'd like do it cross browser, I'd hit something. This is a bit more practical, but I'd hit something it couldn't do, or I hit some weird, like in some for instance, like the finished polyfill. It doesn't work in all browsers. It doesn't work on certain Google phones. So I thought, I'll write a function that polyfills that, and then before you know it, you've got a library basically. So this has happened twice.
Gotcha. I guess I on that front of like, you like user experiences being able to be very like responsive and snappy and quick now. Like you said, even like the distance between screen and like glass surface being shorter, impacting that. Are you disappointed at like how, small a percentage of the web is animated? I mean, even like the big players, right? Like Google.com has no real animation.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, when it's something like Google, I'm definitely against superfluous animation. I don't think that it's needed in every respect. But that's definitely, I don't think we're on the wrong side of it. Like, I don't think everything has to be like a co-drops level website. But there's somewhere between there and where the majority of websites are. That would be like if you've got like a drop-down menu. I know that there's a contingent of people out there who will say, just give me the menu instantly, and I don't need to see any animations. But animations do teach users the difference between the state they were in and the state that they've ended up in. It takes them along the journey rather than changing things to pulling the rug under them and then letting them figure out what's changed. Especially when it's not like a direct, like if it's something that's an indirect action, cause and effect, then that sort of thing can be quite confusing. Animations can be quite instructive, but basically, I don't know. I feel there's certain ways in which it's gotten really nice as well, though, because like when Retina and high resolution displays came out, there was definitely a lag between the assets that we were using. So not as many SVGs, way more like rastered images, and then they'd all look crap because they're all for 1x screens. But actually quite quickly that did change, that now everyone uses SVGs, and if they don't, they'll serve images. Like it's much easier to serve images responsively so that you're getting like a really high fidelity image. And I think just as something, this is all part of it. Like it's even though it's not animations, but these high fidelity assets make a massive difference to how the product feels.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, kind of to your point of like superfluous animations getting in the way. That reminds me of a podcast I listened to years ago. I think it was Software Engineering Daily. I'm trying to remember the guest's name. She worked with like the Vue.js native animations that were like part of Vue at the time. Sarah Drasner.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, and yeah, that was kind of her big point too, is like when animations get in the way, you notice immediately. But when they're done really well, like really quick, like and right in that sweet spot, like they really add to that just engagement with the app. Anyway,
Yeah, totally.
so
it's a super important point, and that's why like the defaults in Motion 1, Framer Motion, they're all under like 0.3 seconds, so they're pretty quick. Maybe could be quicker, I don't know, but I feel like that's a sweet spot. But they'd never be like these 1 second dramatic transitions between one thing and the other.
Yeah. I mean, unless you want that for some reason, right?
Yeah, totally.
Dramatic sweep. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's actually like not. So if you've got like a full screen transition, a 0.3, so it is something you have to think about. It's not just like there's no golden rule that you can just say no animation should be more than 0.3 seconds. Like I'd love to do stuff where we measure the size of the things that's changing. Like if it's a full screen wipe, you don't necessarily, it can be quite jarring for it to happen in 0.3 seconds. It's a bit too quick. But there's performance aspects to consider as well. So you can't go around measuring every element on the page. And likewise, there's certain actions that people do quite regularly. So the first time you might want a bit more of a slow animation for people to really nail or to drive home the thing that's changed. But then the 100th time they've done it, you don't need to drive that home. But currently there's no convenient way of automatically adjusting the duration of animations based on that user's history with your product. So at some point I'd love to make it like automatic, that we add a multiplier on every animation. If this is the first time you've ever used the animation, it's like a 1.3 times duration, just to elongate it a little bit. But that's always one of those things that you think is nice to do, but you've never got around to actually implementing it.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, I guess I had a chance to mess with Framer a little bit. I wasn't familiar with it before kind of preempting this conversation here. And yeah, I felt that it was very easy to kind of go in and like set the durations, and like the feedback loop of making tweaks to animations, I think was like the coolest thing for me. It's like, oh, I could see really quickly how, changing this duration or tweaking the transition function for this animation like affected the feel of the UI. But I also noted that I felt that those mapped pretty directly with like a lot of the variables in like CSS transitions and stuff. Are those like, is that just a function of the web like animation APIs being the same, or is that like a decision you guys made when implementing that?
Yeah, no, it's so there's certain things that it can't do, like springs. There's no springs in web animations. So but when it comes to easing, it's more that there's a fundamental it's not by accident, but it's a fundamental truth of animation, not of like we never try to map it to CSS. It's more that CSS has like I think it's got 5 easing functions.
Something like that.
Yeah, and Cubic Bezier. But so we've got Cubic Bezier and a bunch of presets, just a few more, but not really. It's not like a catalog or anything, but they're quite tiny functions, so we include a few. And yeah, it's just more. It's more because you'll always want an ease in, you'll always want an ease out, you'll always want like there's that ones with like an overshoot. Now they should really be in CSS, but they're not. So that's that. But it's because then basically that's we don't let the limitations of CSS stop it. But where that's not true so much is with Motion 1, where we are kind of beholden to what's already in the platform to some degree. So we add springs, but we only add them to independent transforms where we can do it on pure numbers. So 90 degrees rotation. But if you then start going, what the web is capable of is animating between a string like none and translate X 100 pixels, spring, calc, so it can get really and Motion 1 doesn't do that because it does it, but not with springs. springs or numbers only, because when like the spring is a kilobyte, but then if you want to do that crazy, amazing interpolation between these super complex strings, you've got performance things to worry about. You've got file size. Like, are we going to how are we going to do this? Are we going to take that string and figure out what the matrices is and interpolate between those two, and all sorts of questions and file size? You'd be talking like, an extra 4K, an extra 5K. So it's, for me, Framer Motion's like, let's make the best animation library possible, no matter what, almost. Whereas Motion One's more of a trying to find the line between file size, performance, how can we provide the most features for the absolute smallest bundle size?
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I feel like kind of, if your mission is to get more of the web animated, that's probably a noble, bar to measure yourself by, is like, can people say, oh, the performance? And if the answer to that is no, like, that's probably super helpful. Yeah, I guess maybe to kind of reel us back a little bit and help contextualize, could you give us just an overview on like Framer and what it is and kind of where it sits in the market for those not familiar?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we're in a transitionary period as well. So historically, what it's been is a prototyping tool. So you can imagine, if you've used a Figma or even a Sketch, or going back, I suppose Sketch is the first one, but like one of these site designer tools, but with a freeform canvas, quite importantly. Framers, as a design tool, like Figma, Sketch, they use their own renderers. Framer uses the DOM as the renderer, so what you see is what you're going to get. But beyond being just a design tool, the main difference has always been it's a prototyping tool, where you can, you're building with the real, almost with like the real materials. So you can, when you design an animation, all those performance characteristics, and they're going to end up, if you take the transitions and recreate it in a certain way with Framer Motion, that is going to map pretty one-to-one with, so what you see is what you get. Like, it is a WYSIWYG for interactions, I guess. But so far it's been a prototyping tool. And, this is, I'm not going to lose my job, but I can say that we're transitioning to, depending when this comes out, there's definitely, we'll always support the prototyping use case, but in fact, we've got a lot of effort going into that still as well. But one thing that we're doing now is that you can design and develop the website completely in Framer with breakpoints and components that are reusable and even exportable into your own React component. That's already something you can do, but you'll be able to publish the website directly to a custom domain that you own. And that's, so I've already done that. I've got a photography site. There's not a single line of code in it. And I design it in Framer. I design each page in Framer, like arrange the photos how I like, and then I just click publish, and it will go straight to my custom domain. So that's the direction more that we're going to go this year.
Nice. So did you say like you're kind of positioning yourself more, I don't know, in that like Squarespace realm, kind of like the editable web UI, I don't know, the next generation of that?
Yeah, in a sense. The main difference that I'd say with that is that Squarespace is very much like a templated experience, and most of them are. So this is more like, if you enjoy design, or you can design, and you can design with one of these traditional industry tools, then you can already make a pretty amazing website with elements animating in when you scroll down the page and stuff like that. So yeah, I guess it's very much a more design orientated thing though, because it's so free form. But with the exception that you can also, if you know a developer, they can go in and they can sprinkle in little bits of code, little bits of React, little bits of instantly importing modules from npm, which happens automatically. You don't need to be, that hardcore a developer. You don't need to know command line. You just have to start writing your code, and as soon as you import from Lodash, we'll install Lodash for you. So it's about making that finding that cross between design and development, really.
Nice, very cool. How did you kind of discover Framer and like the Popmotion merge, and how did that all go down?
Well, I remember what I wanted to do at one point was make like an animation editor, and then I saw Framer get released, and I was just like, oh, that's like kind of what I wanted to do, but about a million times cooler. So I just carried on with writing my libraries, and Kuhn, the CEO Framer, he got in touch with me from seeing what I'm not saying I'm addicted to Twitter, but I certainly spent too much time on it. And he'd seen some of that, and they needed an animation library basically to improve that workflow from prototype to production. And that was it, really. So I hadn't really considered working for him, not out of any. I just kind of really, at the time, had enough, I guess, of working for other people. I wanted to work on my own project, if not rarer than just a little bit, until like I ran out of money and needed more. But when we started talking, I realised like it was a pretty perfect fit between what I wanted to do and what they needed out of me. So yeah, it's been almost, is it 4 years? 3 years, I think. It's been a while. Mm-hmm. And and it's great. Yeah.
Nice. So just like for my understanding and for clarity's sake, so now is Framer Motion like what actively like when you're in Framer and making those animations, is that powering the animations like when you go into preview mode as well? Like is that using Framer Motion to render those animations right away?
Yeah. So you are generating real React Framer Motion components, so you can actually, you don't have to, like the whole website thing is a few weeks, months down the line, but what you can do today is design what we call smart component. So it's just an isolated component, and you can give it different variants and hover, press states, and you can there's a mode called handshake, and you can click on that, and that will give you a URL, what we call it, like a URL import. So you can then go to currently Next.js really supports this, but others, I'm sure other platforms like Code Sandbox is working on it or has it implemented, but you'll be able to copy paste that URL. So instead of import motion from Framer Motion, you'll import your button from this URL that we give you and use that directly into your code. And that component it's just a Framer Motion component. And likewise, there was a bug that came up sometime last year, and someone had been using Framer Motion because we use it in Framer as well. Like, so Framer Motion powers all of the animations there, but they'd used it in a way based on like a tutorial that I did. It was kind of like, I thought it was this drag and drop. So at the moment now, if you go into Framer, the downloadable web app thing, there'll be tabs just like in Chrome. And those are all, when you drag them, they reorder, and that's all powered by the layout animation system. But I had no, like when I wrote this chunky demo, I didn't really think that this is going to be used in like a real project. And here it was, like sat inside a Framer, and I had like this cold sweat moment, like, oh my God, like what, this is everywhere. And I need to like, so I converted instead of fixing the bug, which would have been, because it's we kind of like put it together with duct tape, this drag and drop implementation. That's when the reorder components came to be, because I just think we needed like a simple API like that could focus all the entry points onto this functionality, which is then testable. But yeah, that's how that came about, really. So we use it, to answer the question. It's in the UI, it's in the preview, it's in the exported components. So it's quite a fundamental part of that. Anything that moves, basically. It's
Gotcha. So in Framer before, like, you know, like Popmotion became a part of it, how were they animating internally? Like, you know, when you'd preview or whatever, like preview the app, what was it using at the time?
Just internal. They had like an internal animation library, and it was quite interesting. Like when I came aboard, it was the API that was the problem. It wasn't a problem, but they'd come from an imperative. Like they were doing coffee, like the original Framer was CoffeeScript. So the animation library was kind of this imperative, not unlike Popmotion or Greensock or something like that. But when you had the animate function, you'd animate a value. So, you know, if you want to animate lots of values, so it's just things like this. So even though Framer Motion does have all of that same imperative stuff under the hood, and you can, you know, for advanced usage, you can do all of that. In the majority of cases, it's better to use a simple declarative, you know, like props-driven API. So it's less wiring essentially. So they had a lot of the stuff, and a lot of the stuff, like, you know, we'd either got an inspiration from the same places, or like it was just amazing to see, like, we tackled a lot of the same problems. Like, so it was kind of, I don't know, I thought that was pretty cool. So because it meant that already what we had in Popmotion was going to be an easy transition from one to the other, and that was it, and it was.
Yeah. That was my my next question was like, were there API differences that, you know, were challenging? Kind of when it was like, oh well, we're going to try to replace all this with Popmotion, but, you know, XYZ is hard.
They did live together for a little while, but it was more like a superset in the end. So, because they had these animatable values, I think. Whereas now we have motion values, so that bit was almost like a one-to-one. Let's just move from that, you know, that to this. But it was pretty smooth.
Just on a more personal level, was there any like issues with, you know, balancing your time on like spending time on like Popmotion on the library versus working on, you know, like the Framer integration stuff? Was that ever a balancing act?
No, because when I moved to Framer, I took Popmotion with me, and there was like a deal, but like not like so. I mean, I don't want to say it was a deal because it wasn't like like this big baller move, but it was like we'd like worked it out that Popmotion would go to Framer basically, and that meant that like all of what was my side project became my full-time job. So any time I was spending on Popmotion from then on was the job. So that was fine. So there was no. Whereas now, and I didn't do a side project for 2 years, which is amazing. Whereas now with Motion One, that's like I sort of brought back this side project element into my life. So at that point, I mean, it's not difficult to choke off the time. But it is difficult, like that motivation or keeping up those levels in terms of having time mentally for your side project as well as your day job. That's more where the struggle comes in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
So because you've got to be careful to like not burn out, basically.
I'm curious. You've talked about this on other podcasts. Like your advice for people who are working on a project, an open source project. What advice would you give them if they're pursuing it to be backed by a company, or kind of your thoughts there?
And when you say you've heard me talk about this, at the risk of contradicting myself, what did I say then? What was my last answer to this?
Let's see. What podcast was that on? Oh, the React podcast.
Oh, yeah.
And that's been a couple of years now. But at the time you were pro. Yes.
My situation might have changed. I think that I was lucky. I think that was number one. Being super focused is another thing. Like I obviously only do animation, and that is it's like a blessing and a curse, because like I'm quite interested in shaders and some 3D stuff, but I'll never really like, I don't know, I feel like I can mess around with it, but I'll never be able to, or at least for a while, I don't think I'll have the time to like get my head completely involved in that. And I think that I feel like when you really immerse yourself in something, that's when you can start getting quite good at it. And before then, like you kind of just, unless you're naturally talented, which like I've seen, I'm no. So you need that time in it to keep to get that good. And I think then you've got a better chance of someone else needing the skills that you're just, that you're showing off naturally. You're showing that you've got a natural enthusiasm for something, which I think will lead to a natural, like the project that you're making will be good as well. But that's not to say that that's advice that I'd happily give someone. Like you have to be super into it to be able to spend that much time thinking about it, doing it, because otherwise, like that is when you it's when you burn out basically. And I think the primary thing is just to, enjoy it. And so I enjoy it. So I try and be quite mindful of like the amount of time that I spend doing something. But at the end of the day, this is something I really enjoy. So even though I think, wouldn't it be good to like get involved with some other part of this industry, I enjoy this enough that that's not really a problem for me.
Yeah, awesome.
I also like, just as a side note, I remember like there was, there's already people working in the sort of world of like web animations API and like trying to make a nice API around that. And what I said because when I released Motion 1, I think I got the sense of like, is what I've just done like kind of a waste of time? And I was like, no, because like, first of all, like, you now are like almost like a domain specialist. You know so much more about the ins and outs of this than like basically anyone else. And they said, well, what if I pivoted to this other thing? And I was like, it doesn't matter what you do. You just have to like that. If you're interested in that, then definitely do it. But don't worry about like it being the right thing to do. Just enjoy it, get good at it. And whatever happens from that, like, most people work like a 9 to 5. I do now, luckily, on something that was my side project. But that's just like what's more important is just to like, yes, it's to stay. It's the whole like, again, it's like to stay in the game. Not, you just got to keep enjoying yourself basically. Otherwise,
yeah. No, and it's interesting because especially with animations, I mean, there's a new animation library that comes out. Like, I mean, we see so many, so it's interesting. It feels like there's a lot of stuff in the space, but it's one of those things that can always get better. And as you guys were talking about earlier, like there's a way to do too much, and so kind of finding that sweet spot is a challenge. I think that's it can't hurt to just know more about that and have more experience with that. No, that's really cool. Okay, so we are coming up on time. Did you want to plug anything for our listeners? Point them in a direction to go look at stuff, that sort of thing?
No, all I'd say, so if you want to check out, I'm hoping Google will do its job to some degree, but like there's Framer Motion, if you're a React developer, Motion 1, if you want to use Web Animations API, or you're a Vue developer, and my Twitter is twitter.com/Matt G. Perry. And I believe, that's, I had nothing to plug. I'd suggest like, the whole follow me thing, but that's where I like publish everything. So if you want to keep up to date on Framer Motion, on Motion 1, I do it all through there, and hopefully there'll be a news on a Motion 1 for Svelte soon. So if you're a Svelte fan, then definitely stay tuned. I hate that phrase, stay tuned. It doesn't even make any sense in this day and age, but I said it. So
very cool, awesome, and we'll include all those links in our show notes.
Cool. All right.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt, for coming on, and we'll see you around.
Yeah, thanks.